Speaker is Lloyd Smith, and I think it's a topic that's very appropriate in regards to tonight's theme, hot and cold, opposite sides of the spectrum. Lloyd Smith will be discussing the electromagnetic spectrum. So here is Lloyd Smith and the spectrum.
Right, turn the light off, turn it on.
When you start?
Yeah. No. When I reach the 5.
Understood.
Right.
Okay.
As Vince said, it's clever. Tonight's subject is one that you no doubt have lost sleep thinking about, wondering about, the electromagnetic spectrum. The reason I picked it is that I ran into an article about it in a magazine, and I thought, wow, I hadn't thought about that for years and years and years, since the good old days when I thought, well, actually I knew for sure I was going to be a physics major in college before I came to my senses and switched to English. But the electromagnetic spectrum is one of those things that nobody knows much about, everybody's heard about, and it's really, really important. In fact, as you'll see by the end of the speech, were it not for a lot of elements on this, we would not be here. I mean, it's not only that we would be dead, we would never have existed. Now let's think about this. You probably remember from high school or college science classes that there's a basic difference between matter and energy. Matter is the stuff that you can touch and see and hold and whatnot. Energy is comprised of a bunch of different kinds of forces that's usually exerted upon matter, and that's how we know that energy exists, because it does something to matter, like it moves or something, right? Okay, most energy in the universe is in the form of the electromagnetic spectrum. I have a handout, and this may or may not improve the situation, but we will see. This is actually a version of the chart. It's up there. The way to think about a spectrum is that it's a line. It runs from one extreme, in this case a low number, to another extreme, in this case a high number. Look first at the side that appears to be like this.
Okay.
Yeah. At the low end of the electromagnetic spectrum are long waves. There are short waves at the other end. Ooh, science is fascinating in that way, isn't it? Long waves are very, very long. They're about 1,000 meters and longer. 1,000 meters is like 3,000 feet, okay? And they can be much, much longer than that. The U.S. Navy has 2 huge antennas above the Arctic Circle in Canada that broadcast at the 100,000 meter length. They refuse to say what they're for, but it's obviously to commute with, or to communicate with underwater nuclear submarines, because there's no other way to do it without compromising the submarines. Waves like that don't really matter to us. They're so large that we can't perceive them, and so they're pretty much irrelevant. As you move up the line, though, to where the waves are getting shorter, we reach the radio and TV section of the spectrum. This matters a lot to us. Most of our modern world depends on radio and TV signals in the broadest sense. This radiation includes everything from VHF 2 through 6, so that's television channels 2 through 6, by the way, FM radio, UHF, which is channels 7 through 13. That spot is not really empty, and then UHF radio. This apparently empty spot right here, and this one down here, is where everything else is. Cell phones, wireless, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, everything else. And as you might expect, those supposedly empty areas are very, very valuable. The government actually conducts auctions to lease them to telecommunications companies. It's common for these to go for hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, because those signal areas are so valuable. One thing about this, in terms of government regulation, lots of people are against that. If there were no government regulation and every cell phone company and radio station or whatnot could just broadcast whatever they felt like, none of it would work. There would be just nothing but static and malfunctioning wireless and whatnot. Now, as you move up the line, you get to microwaves. Microwaves are actually a long chunk of the spectrum. At the bottom of the microwave section is radar. And that's radar as in, detecting the positions of airplanes and whatnot. But also in the low part of the band, that's where the radar goes for speed traps, and one that you have probably experienced more than once over the last week. You walk up to the door of Fred Meyer's, the door opens up. If you look up above the door, there's a little transmitter up there. That's a radar transmitter. It's detected you and then activated the door. That's not something to think about a lot, but you'd sure notice it. Have you ever watched anybody walk into one of those doors expecting it to open? Because we're so used to it working the way it's supposed to work. Above that, roughly where the word microwaves is where the kind of microwaves that we're used to, the microwave oven kind of microwave, those work because the waves, the photons, enter into the surface of whatever they're trying to warm, and they cause the molecules to vibrate. When they vibrate, they rub together and they heat up. When you hear people say, well, I don't use a microwave oven because the microwaves are dangerous, they stay in the food. No, they don't. They just hit the molecules that are in the food, cause them to vibrate, and then they dissipate. Up above there is infrared, thermal infrared, and then regular infrared. Infrared heats things up too. Have you ever been in a restaurant where you can see where the cook puts the food out on the shelf? There's a kind of a reddish light. That's an infrared light. It warms things up. Unlike microwaves, though, the photons don't enter the food. They just heat the surface of it. They vibrate the molecules on the surface and keep it warm. This is not intended to cook the food. It's just intended to warm it up. Then we get into the visual light spectrum. This is the part that's the most important to us, even though it's a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. Visual light's important to us because without being sensitive to it, we wouldn't be able to see anything. Now, you might think, for example, that you're looking at this lectern. You're not. What you're seeing are photons that are coming in the window from daylight, from the lights. They bounce off of it. They enter your eyes. Your brain calculates what the different electrical frequencies mean and creates a picture inside of your head. None of us can actually see that. What you're seeing is a construct within your brain. So all of us are seeing something slightly different, even though we believe that's a physical, real object. Now, here's the important part. From this part on in the spectrum, this is where things get dangerous. Ultraviolet light can damage cells in your body. You've probably been told, don't stay out in the sun like that. That's because the photons can enter the molecules and the atoms in your skin and the rest of your body. They can knock electrons loose. That changes the atoms into ions, which react chemically with one another, and they can disrupt your DNA or literally damage your organs and whatnot. Ultraviolet's a very dangerous thing. You do not want to get bad sunburns and whatnot. X-rays above that, then gamma rays. Gamma rays are the exciting part of the electromagnetic spectrum that you get from nuclear reactions. You don't want to be close to these. They are so strong that they can simply rip the molecules in your body apart. If you hear you've heard the expression radiation sickness, and that's what that is. The good news is that if you were close to a radioactive source, you're not going to get cancer, which would be a possible outcome because radiation sickness will kill you a lot quicker. Now, if you flip that chart over for a moment, there's a different representation of the same thing on the back. Take a look at where it says microwaves. Notice that it says it's 1 centimeter, about the size of a grain of sugar. That's the size of the wave. The waves are literally waves. That's the measure of like the peak of one wave to the peak of the other wave. Have you ever noticed, this is a curiosity I'll close with, when you walk up to your microwave oven, have you ever noticed there's a little grid in the glass?
Yes.
And those little holes are slightly smaller than the length of a microwave. And they're not there for a decoration. They're there to make sure the microwaves don't come out and harm you, which they could do. They could, by warming up the interior of your eye, for example. That's not a good thing to have happen. So there you have it. Then you can amaze all of your friends by pointing out that those little holes are smaller than the microwave, about the size of a grain of sugar. Notice on the other end, the ultraviolet and gamma radiation and whatnot, the waves are in atomic size. That's why they can disrupt the molecules. When you hear somebody talk about how dangerous cell phones are because they can cause brain cancer, no, they can't. The radiation is way down here. The waves are much too large to damage the cells in your body. They're not ionizing. That's an internet myth that cell phones are dangerous. They could be dangerous if you hurt yourself because you're not watching when you use them, but they can't give you cancer. It's not possible. And now you have the quickie view of the electromagnetic spectrum. You probably know more than about 99% of the population.
Well, thank you for putting those tired myths to rest, Lloyd. Knowledge is power. All right, I'd like to now introduce our table topics.
Allow about a minute to fill out these little forms.
Oh, yes.